how do we explain, if we're going to say there was a bottle in a bag, how do we explain the fact that Dr. Murray wouldn't have had to do that? Now you can see the tab that's on the propofol bottle, People's 30. And you recall the exhibition Mr. Waldron showed you when he walked around here, and you heard the pop of People's 30 as he pulled the tab on the bottle. And then immediately thereafter, what happened is we all broke, and the next thing you saw was stipulation. Now, he was approaching Dr. Schaefer when he did that. What do you think Dr. Schaefer was going to do with that now unbridled bottle? Because after the stipulations, he didn't do anything with it. The problem with this is Dr. Murray didn't have to go through the ridiculous, absurd step of cutting a bag, propping it up into a cut IV bag, hanging it where it could fall. He didn't have to do all that, because all he had to do was hang it. And Dr. Schaefer was going to do exactly that. Dr. Schaefer was going to just explain something else to you. You remember when Dr. Schaefer testified that this remember he showed this IV line? Remember that? And you remember when he took it out and he hung it and he showed how you could do it this way. You could do it with two lines. Do you know why he did that? Do you know why he came up with that theory? Because looking at this particular evidence diagram, the problem was there was no way to get a propofol drip through a long tubing, because the tubing that was at the scene was clear and clean, and there was nothing in the long tubing. What was in the short tubing was exactly what Dr. Murray said, propofol and lidocaine. But the long tubing, which would have been required for a drip, had nothing in it. So Dr. Schaefer sits up there, and he says, well, there had to be another tubing, and this tubing wouldn't have worked because this tubing is vented, and this tubing isn't. And I stood up here, and I held it out for you. I wanted you to see it. And I had him point to the venting on this tubing. And it was obvious that this tubing also was vented. And then the next day, Dr. Schaefer comes in. And what does he say? Oh, you know what? I was wrong about that. Despite the fact there's a man's future on the line, he just conveniently forgot that. This line is ridiculous anyway. This line is ordered by Dr. Murray's office on a regular basis. This line is used for an infusion pump. This line is too long. But they had to explain somehow why why the lining, the long tube, did not have any propofol in it. Because all Dr. Murray would have had to do is take it out and stick it in. What the prosecution did with Dr. Schaefer is they abrogated their responsibility to their case. Dr. Schaefer is a pharmacokineticist. He's a computer modeler. Yes, he's an anesthesiologist as well. But instead of having police officers investigate the scene, or the coroner's office tell you what happened at the scene. They hired this man in April of 2011. April 2011, almost 2 years after the death of Michael Jackson. Despite the fact they had already had 13 other experts. And they tell Dr. Schaefer, you solved the crime for us. And Dr. Schaefer, who told you on cross-examination, and I didn't ask him this question, he told me, without me asking, I don't have an agenda. Worked backwards, just like Mr. Walgren said, from a dose to concentration, and he kept working. And they turned him into a cop. And no, he didn't stand up here and tell you that these were possibilities. He stood up here, you remember, it should be in your notes. He told you this is what happened. I want to say some things about Dr. Schaefer versus Dr. White for a second, because I just had to sit there and have Mr. Walgren say these things about Dr. White, and I want to defend him for a second. The reason you have experts, they're supposed to be scientists. They come up here, they sit on the stand, they tell you about scientific principles, they tell you what's possible. They give you the tools that enable you to make determinations factually. But they don't take positions, because scientists don't take positions. Good scientists don't. And Dr. Schaefer got up here, and he was not a scientist. He was an advocate. He's trying to prove a point. He's trying to prove a case. And Dr. White, he sits up here, and what does Dr. White? Mr. Walgren played it. If Dr. White, completely honest, I don't have those qualifications. Did Dr. Schaefer ever say that? No, I wouldn't do what Dr. Murray did in that circumstance. Would Dr. Schaefer ever say that? If Dr. White wanted to be an advocate, he would have been an advocate. And to say that Dr. White doesn't have the credentials, oh, he used to be? You saw what Dr. White has done and what he has meant to this particular Society of Anesthesiologists. And Dr. White knows more about propofol than Dr. Schaefer will ever know. And Dr. White sat up here and he just tried to tell you the truth. That's all he did. And he didn't have to. For his $11,000. But Dr. Schaefer, because he thinks we won't know, that we won't figure this out, he gives you simulations, one right after the other, and none of them, except this last one, which we asked him to do, have anything to do with the case. I asked him, 6 injections, 100 milligrams? Where did that come from? Because nothing, no statement, nothing, no facts at the scene, no evidence, nothing suggested that. In fact, he said nobody would do that. But he provides that to you. 6 injections, 50, same thing. There's absolutely no evidence of injections, 6 injections. He shows you Murray 6 injections, 50 milligrams. Propofol 50. None of these things ever showed up at the scene. Nobody ever suggested it. He just kept showing them to you. This propofol 25 milligrams, he showed a rapid bolus over a 20 to 30 second period of time that nobody ever said happened. And why would he do that? Why would he do that? Because what he didn't want to tell you is when you work backwards from concentration to dose, you could do 1,000,000 of these. But what he wanted you to believe is that he had considered every possibility.